Well, we're gonna go on these witches, and most of them have to do with um, Oneida people, and they could have been from any one of the tribes in New York, like the Mohawks or the Onondagas or anybody else, also have witch stories. But these are taken from our WPA stories. Do you know? Anybody know what the WPA stories are? Yeah, those are Works Progress Administration. That's one of those acronyms under President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now here's a connection to President Franklin Roosevelt. And he created the WPA, which meant that people could be employed to do certain things. And they were in the arts, many of them were in the arts, or in the humanities, which would mean history, telling stories. And we had one. We had a program here that was initiated from Madison, from the university at Madison. And there were a number of Oneida men and women who were employed, who were all went to boarding schools. They could all write English well. They were all fluent Oneida speakers, and they went into the community and interviewed all kinds of Oneida people who spoke Oneida at the time, in 1939 to 1942. And they went from house to house, and they talked to older people. Some of those people couldn't speak English, but they spoke Oneida. And so the interviewers would go into the community and talk about different subjects. And this one happens to be, this is Josh here. He's not a witch, I don't think. And they went into the community and they interviewed these people who spoke Oneida, and they told them the stories that they knew from childhood or from their grandparents or whatever. Now, I was talking about this project this morning and said, I don't know of anybody now who tells witch stories or tells witch stories to their children in this community or anything. And I think some of them were told to control children, you know, so,
Sure.
you know, to maybe make
Stay
them
out of the woods.
afraid of something, big animals or whatever. And so they would tell their children that. So these were the WPA stories. I'm going to read the preface to you, but I want you to look at the photo. It's not a photo, it's a drawing. On the front drawing there, and there's two women, and they've got something hanging over that pole there. What are those?
Snakes.
They're snakes, yeah. They're grass snakes. Some of the stories would tell that they had to go out and catch grass snakes, and they had to cut off their tails, and they had to bleed them into these containers here. And they don't look too upset. They're probably, this is what they normally do, so they're not upset or anything like that. Well, now I'm going to read the preface here. If you have questions at any time, let me know. Hi, Joyce.
Hi.
Here's paper for you too. It just says page 1 up there. Many generations are a part of this collection of stories. The generations of the 1800s and before that means, you know, like 1,000 years before, who lived them. The generation of the late 1800s, this is another one now. There was a generation before 1800s, and now there's a generation of the late 1800s who remembered them and told them. These are Oneidas. These are your grandparents if you're Oneida. The generation of the early 1900s who first wrote them down, the older generation of today who worked on translating and transcribing them. And there were a lot of folks, Oneidas, who did that. They gathered them up and then they got them in Oneida and they wrote them down in Oneida Words and then they transcribed it into English. And the younger generation of today who are learning the Oneida language by reading them. They are dedicated to the memory of the past, the education of the present, and the promise of the future for the Oneida people. The author names listed in the table of contents originally told the stories in the late 1930s to the Oneida writers of the WPA-sponsored Writers Project. That's what I just told you about. Those writers are identified after each story. I think I'll go through the table of contents and read some of the authors and you will recognize their names. Each of the stories is given 3 versions. The first is in Oneida spelling with a rough interlinear phrase-by-phrase translation. This version may be particularly useful for those learning the language. And I'm reading those languages. I'm reading the words, Oneida words, so I can hear myself say them, and so I can properly pronounce them, and I'm getting so that they're becoming familiar to me, because if I repeat it over and over, it becomes familiar. And the second version is in Oneida alone, for those who know Oneida, is Oneida alone. And the third is a freer English translation for those who do not know Oneida. So there's 3 versions of the same story, that's all I'd say. Much of the translation work, both the interlinear and the freer versions, were done by Amos, Christian, Maria Hinton, Mary L. Danforth. You know Mary Danforth? Wally? Yeah. And who also read the stories into tape. 4 other speakers, Melinda Dockstader, Mary Jordan, Flora Skendor, and Rebecca Ninham very patiently spent much time reviewing and proofreading endless preliminary versions. Mary Stevens, I think that it says Stephen here, but I think that's supposed to be Mary Stevens, had the thankless task of typing in the endless preliminary versions. Donna Appleby supplied the artwork, and Mary Lemieux did the artwork for the cover. All of this work has been made possible by the Oneida Bilingual Program directed by Amelia Cornelius and funded through a Bilingual Bicultural Education Act Title VII grant. And this preface is written by Clifford Abbott, and the year is January 1983. It's quite a while ago, so that would be 34 years ago that this was written. So, before I go into the names, we'll go into a glossary of, this is supernatural terms. So I suppose all of these stories have a supernatural beginning or a relationship. Oneida terms from any supernatural do not always have easy or exact translations into English. Here's a list of some of the most important Oneida concepts with some hints of how they are different from one another and from the English terms. Awelabuska. This term is generally translated as witch. Witches are human beings with special powers that they usually use for evil purposes. Often they can disguise themselves as animals, and they tend to be hard to kill. Have you heard of the animals, a woman or a man being transformed into
A shapeshifter.
yeah, into anything, into a wolf, into a dog, into a bear, or anything, any of that kind of thing? There are many, many stories that go along with that. what they practice is called Oela Uska Sla, or witchcraft. Most witches are female, but male witches are possible. They would be called Lawela Uska. The only thing they change is they put a L in front of there to make the male version of that word. Another term some people use for a female witch is Aguelusta. For some people, this is a more respectful term or used to describe a smaller or younger witch. But for other people, Agueluska and Agueluska are used interchangeably. So there's nothing, all they did was put a AK in front of there and change the word to make it slightly different meaning. Yokotu. This word is used to describe a person with special psychic powers. Unlike a witch, these powers are usually used for good, not evil purposes. Some translate this a magician or prophet, whereas witchcraft is usually learned. The powers of Yagotu are usually a gift that certain individuals have. Both men and women can have this gift. A male would be called Lotku. So you only usually just put the L or some version of L something in front of it. Yagot lose. This term describes someone who has been seen or been bothered by a ghost, spirit, or apparition. Has anybody heard of anybody being bothered by ghosts lately? No? When I was a kid, we used to hear that from time to time. That somebody would hear something or what, I heard about. So, there are no special powers in such a person, but they are often spoken of as being bewitched. The male term is Lotnyant Luze. I practiced this so I would know how to say it. Yagotla Swadu. This term is also used to describe someone who has been bewitched. But it is quite different from Yago Tlant Luze. Instead of seeing things, the victim here acts like one of the clan animals. So they know that this person was, say, a bear. And then they have to have a ceremony so that the person is cured. And so there is a ceremony for that. And it says it here, it usually takes about 3 ceremony to cure this kind of affliction. A male who has this affliction would be called Lokla Swadu. Yenukwa Sly Yande. Yep. I gotta get that right. Yenukwa Sly Yande Lise. This is someone who knows much about medicine, especially herbal medicine. Such a person does not necessarily have any special powers, although witches who do have special powers often know and use medicines. The dividing line between medicines used for physical curing and those used for supernatural purposes is not always clear. The term for a male is Lanukwa, Sly Hyundai Lise. Although these are cures, they are not really doctors. The term Ladijat, which is usually translated as doctor, refers more to one who knows white man's medicine. Yundilu Uske Slunihe. This term describes the action of doing witchcraft. Literally it means she is doing witchcraft or she is practicing to be a witch. And Yago La Nunya Nihe. This term describes the action of casting a spell on someone or bewitching. So different things for different purposes, yeah. Solo, this word means false face. And the man who is using the false face as part of a curing ceremony would be called solo. All of the above words refer to human beings of one sort or another. There are other beings that the Oneidas have words for. I'm not going to go through all of this. Well, a couple of them I will. They're very interesting. Luskin is a skeleton, and sometimes young people were said to have seen a skeleton, and it was if somebody were deceased and they were not at peace, then that's why you would see the skeleton. The skeleton was like it was alive. And this one, Ungoy Ilax, that's interesting. This term translates directly as, quote, he eats people. And he lives by himself and is particularly fond of children. So that would be how a story for, if some little kid is not doing or going, they're going outside at night or something and they're not supposed to be doing that. They might be told this. And this one is Dehari Galalu. These are the little people. I think some of you may have heard of the little people. My granddaughter, Gracie, who's not with us anymore, she saw little people more than once. And it says that you have to believe in them, and then you may see them. And Anaryahu, this is a giant, and these other ones here are pretty interesting. Onuyunt, this is a magic bug. And I was interested in that, and he said this magic bug was carried around by people, and they were carried in silk kerchiefs or handkerchiefs, and they could do a magic. That's why they're called a magic bug. And you had to take care of them, and you had to feed them, and all that kind of stuff. I got more interested in these stories since I've been in the culture program for the last 20 years. I kind of heard about this stuff before, but I really, there wasn't anybody that was convinced about it. But in these stories, there are people who believed in it and who had magic bugs. And here's another one. Gana Hudot. This is a special hunting worm. It can make a hunter more successful if properly used. And I read one of the stories, and it said the hunter who went out with this hunting worm, if he saw a deer, the deer would stand still and let him kill him. I thought that was pretty interesting. And every time this hunter went hunting, he had his hunting worm along with him, and he would always be successful. And Adya Lusla. This is a ghost or spirit. Most often it is frightening, but sometimes it acts as a guide. In Yagosu, a use. This word means she is giving a sign, omen, or prophecy. It is most often used for certain animals whose appearance or actions have a specific meaning. So I printed out those pages from this. These are all witch stories. There are a lot of witch stories. So what I'm going to do here is read in English some of the story lines and who said them, and see if you recognize any of these people. This is the name of the story. Her Voice Ahead. That's her name, her Indian name. Her Voice Ahead. Used to be a Witch by Lavinia Elm. Here's one. Bleeding snakes. In order to be a witch, you have to go out and catch those snakes. You have to cut off their tails and bleed them into these wooden bowls here. Then you become a witch. And Otku is the snake. And this one is by Mrs. Angeline Beechtree. You know Angeline Beechtree? You know where the land office is now?
Mhm.
That's where she lived. Andrew and she lived there. And when she passed away, I went to her funeral, all-night funeral, the wake at that house. There was a little yellow house there and there was a barn back there, right where the land office is now. One Became a Witch by Jonathan Denny. I didn't know Jonathan Denny. He probably passed before when I was a child. But his son was Dewey Denny, and he was my dad's best friend, so I knew Jonathan's son. Indian with Supernatural Power and Witch by Jonathan Denny. Now, these are the titles of these stories in this book, in this compilation of stories. And those are the people like Jonathan who told it in Oneida to the person who wrote it down. And then they transcribed it, and they put it in English. And they put it also on tape. So these stories are all preserved. And they all believed by Randall Dockstader, The Doctor and the Witch by Ulysses Webster. Anybody know these people yet? These are people that were living in 1939 to 1942 and who were interviewed. And they were old-time people who spoke Oneida, probably every day, and they told these stories to the writer. And the writers were Oneida who spoke the language as well. A Witch by Jane Cornelius, and I Believe in Witches by Mary Jane Homer. We'll get to some of the stories here pretty soon. But I wanted to let you know who these people were who were telling this story. There's no title, and this is Abby Summers, and She Was a Witch by Stadler King. There's descendants of Stadler King who want to know what he wrote, and so I'm going to do some copies of his work. And this is one of them here. That's your great-grandfather?
Yes. Wait. Great.
Great-great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My grandma's grandma.
And if anybody else is related to any of these people, let me know. The Gold Ring, and this is a story, and it's by Mrs. Samantha King. That's daughter's wife, I believe. Witches, Chauncey Baird. Witchcraft, John A. Skinner. Anybody heard about John? One-Armed John? He had a log house up on the corner of U and Freedom Road at one time, and that's Vera Wilson's father. I think most people know Vera Wilson, and that's Vera Wilson's father. How They Killed Witches by Loomis Skinner. And here is They Killed the Leader of the Witches by Ida Blackhawk. A Witch by Rachel Swamp. Now, there were reasons for killing witches, and whenever a witch was killed, and the person who killed that witch was not punished. And that says that in the stories. I don't know of, there was only one that was named outright, but the rest of them are not named, they just say a witch. But there was one, and I thought she was my relative, I still do. There were Louis Denny and his wife, and they were considered witches. And I believe that's my relatives. They lived on the, well, we call it Seminary Road now. That was the second ridge when I was growing up. Here's a witch by Rachel Swamp, a witch killed by my grandfather, Sarah Summers. His child and a witch, Jefferson Baird. She prepares good ground by Josephine Skenador. Where do you think the ground is? She prepares good ground. The cemetery.
Oh,
Cemetery, yeah. You could, yeah. And Bewitched by Rachel Swamp. False Face Medicine Man by Jonathan Denny. St. Vitus Dance by Alex Metoxen. Does anybody know what St. Vitus Dance is? I think what you call it now is, what do they call it? When a person shakes uncontrollably?
Epilepsy?
Alzheimer's.
Epilepsy?
Not
Parkinson's?
Parkinson's.
Parkinson's.
Parkinson's, and I think that was Parkinson's disease. And apparently there were quite a few people that had this affliction. And so the witches would try to cure the person, or they would have a false face ceremony to cure the person. And it says St. Vitus Dance, and the next one says Man Bewitched. Well, that Man Bewitched is probably the same affliction. And Unmasked Medicine Man by Edward Stevens. Here it says Gus Gus Go. I told Josh, I said, I think you know what that word is. And here it says the Great Pig. Yeah, he knew what it was. Mrs. Jane Webster. And he saw a ghost. All of these have Oneida Words, and I'm reading the English words. He saw a ghost by Stoddard King. A ghost by Elizabeth Huff. She saw a ghost, Jane Cornelius. And he saw a ghost. She saw one, then he saw one, by Levi Elm. And Feast for the Ghost, Feast for the Ghost. Oneidas are great for feast.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have feast for anything. You know, if somebody gets baptized, that'll be a feast. If somebody has a birthday, that'll be a feast. If somebody dies, now we got another feast.
And then 10 days or a year later, another feast.
Yeah,
Before
they're
that
great for feast.
Mm-hmm.
And Being Ghosted by Rachel Swamp. And here's one by Mrs. Jefferson Cornelius. And we got some more. Special Powers. This is under the title that they have special powers. They have Supernatural by Elizabeth Huff. Twins with special powers. Twins had special powers. Everybody knew it. And there was another one, a child. They said if a child was born with a caul is a veil over the face when the child is born. And that's another person with special powers. But there was it seemed to me a big conflict between the church and the traditional people, because in these stories it says that you were not to get baptized, because if you were baptized, like these people with special powers, if they were baptized, then they would lose their power. And that's in the stories repeatedly. So there seemed to be a big conflict there with the philosophy of that. Born with Supernatural Powers, Ida Beard. Boy with Special Powers by John Metoxen. Oneidas used to have mystic power, Jesse Peters. When the Oneidas had supernatural powers by Chauncey Baird. And Medicine Man, Marie Webster. And then there's other supernatural beings. Not through yet, we got a lot of stuff here. All Sorts of Things They Believe by Rachel Swamp. Magic Bug, Mrs. Thomas Elm. Tom Elm was the great trumpet player in the band. And we've got pictures of him and his wife. I think they had 3 boys. And she, Mrs. Elm, we've got pictures of her. And she talks about the magic bug also. And the way I happened to find the magic bug is by John Skenador. Hunting Worm, Ulysses Webster. And Hunting Helper, Ulysses Webster. Hunting Bug, Tom Elm. Luskin, that's the skeleton. Abram Smith, and Omens. Huldah Swan. So, I'm gonna maybe read 1 or 2 of these stories. I don't remember them verbatim, but I can, we can talk about it if we go along. How They Killed Witches. I thought that was pretty interesting. I guess I will tell you a story. This one is by Mary L. Danforth. Mary Danforth was, her name was Mary Antone. She's a relative of mine. She's probably a relative of some of you in this room. And she grew up, I think, in Tigerton, and she married Louis Danforth. Mary Antone married Louis Danforth. I guess I will tell you a story how it happened that the witches came here. It is said that they came from New York Castle, or that direction. That's when the Oneidas removed from New York to Wisconsin. There's a lot of that, a connection back to the original homeland in these stories. When the Oneidas lived there, it became terrible. There were so many of them. So that means so many of what? Of witches at that time. I don't know why there were so many witches. They don't say that. They decided, the people, to find a way to get rid of them. They decided to kill them. So then they dug a hole several feet long and several feet deep. Then they put a pole across it. It was only high enough to sit on. Now then, they gathered up the witches and blindfolded them. I don't know how they got the witches to comply with this, but it's what they say. Now then, they carried them to where the pole was across the hole. They sat there, then they gave the people clubs, which they used to hit them on the head. Oh, that was an interesting way. They fell in the hole, and the people covered the hole up with dirt. It is said that it must have been around the time that the Oneidas moved that this happened. And maybe it was the move that caused this big distress, this trauma. Because I don't think that most of the Oneidas didn't want to move to Wisconsin, but they didn't have much choice. And maybe they were very traumatized about all of this. Because it so happened that 3 women witches came here, they managed to escape, otherwise they would have been killed at Oneida Castle. oh, so they didn't kill them all. That 3 of them managed to come with the groups of Oneidas who did remove to Wisconsin. It so happened that one woman had a daughter who she wanted to marry off, but the one that she was looking at had already made arrangements to marry another girl. She said, the mother, if he marries another girl, I can kill him within 2 weeks. Well, I don't know how that would help the girl, but this is her method. We had gone to town, and while he was on his way home, he met some kind of an unusually strange-looking animal. He thought to himself, quote, this seems to look like a witch. He went right up to her and grabbed her. She got very angry, and they fought until he finally got the best of her. It was then she said, quote, have mercy on me, don't kill me, tell anyone, no, you can have whatever you need for as long as I live, if you never tell anyone what happened. He pitied her, they say, so he let her go. For sure, whenever he needed money, she would give him as much as she had. They say it was this way until she passed away. Translated by Mary L. Danforth. What do you think of that story?
There's in history books and in articles, there's a theory that the reason why Handsome Lake, Galileo didn't spread to Oneida as much as it did other places is because of witches. There's a story about a witch trial in the early 1800s when the Handsome Lake and the Galileo was just starting up, and that they came to Oneida and they found witches and they had a trial and they killed these 3 witches, and that was a very traumatic experience for the Oneida community. And in the articles it says that put them off from the Longhouse and Handsome Lake and his ways. So a lot of people didn't adopt it. That's what some interpretations say.
Oh.
But they directly talk about those 3 in that story. Talk about 3 witches being put on trial and being killed at Oneida Castle before we came here, and it being dividing the community.
Didn't they take them in the longhouse and tomahawk them or something?
It was something like that. It doesn't go into that much detail in the articles I read, but yeah, it talks about how that was a very divisive. So I'm looking up, factions and things, and that a very divisive thing right before we moved that split the 2 groups even more. The traditional Oneidas and the Christian Oneidas.
For your information, the Handsome Lake was a Seneca, and his name was Scania de Leo, and he was in a coma, they said, for 4 years. I couldn't imagine that, but for 4 years. And when he came back into consciousness, he had all of these ways of living, which were close to Christianity and belief. And he said to the people that you had to do this and you had to do that and you have to do this and that. If you want to be good people, you have to do all of these kinds of things. And that's what Josh is talking about.
And this was in Oneida, New York.
Yeah, it's happening in
Oneida, yes, Oneida, New York. And if there were 3 witches killed, or any number of witches, those people were probably our relatives too. I mean, everybody was related, so there had to be some, a lot of deciding to be done, and I don't think anybody could have been too happy to have that done.
This story takes place in Oneida, New York?
Yes, they said, that's what they said, before they moved.
Oh, these stories are from, okay.
So what I can imagine is that the community, Oneida Castle in New York, was very traumatized. That they were going to be forced to move, and they didn't know where what the country was like that they would move to, and what could they take with them that were their belongings, just what they could carry on their back. And they had to take seed corn, their seed was the main thing, so they'd have something to survive on when they got to their new country. But all of this stuff was going on at the same time. Stanya DeLeo and his prophecies and the way every Iroquois community should live is what he said. And Oneidas, some of them knew that, not all of them. That was a problem too. Split in the community and their beliefs.
And then this woman was gonna give him her money,
Yes,
and where does she get the money?
I don't know where she got. I don't know where.
know,
But they
it's-
talk
it's-
about that too. They
Yeah.
talk about having money,
Yeah,
and I don't know.
I mean, I could see her having a lot of food or baskets
It
of
could be
weaving or something.
translation. It could be something in the translation, like maybe it doesn't translate to money, maybe it translates to valuable, but the modern day people, when they translated it, thought money,
Okay,
but yeah,
okay.
that could happen.
Yeah, the English translation may. That's right. May have tried a thing of value into money.
Mhm.
Okay, here's another little one. They killed the leader of the witches. A long time ago, the people agreed to kill all the witches. So they got the old women together. Oh yeah, right.
With you old man?
Nobody else could do this but the old women. Then they asked them what they knew about witchcraft. Not one would admit she was a witch. They wanted to round them all up and say, which one of you are witches? But they accused them all of being witches. They said they will all have to be killed. So they started to kill them. One of the women protested. She said, that man standing there knows the most about witchcraft. The man answered. He said, this woman is their leader. So they killed her right away. These are very, very, very interesting versions of what they did and what they believed. Now, you wouldn't have about 10 stories about killing witches unless there was something to it. And I think they might have been talking all about the same incident, but their version of it. And this one says, my grandfather, now dead, killed a witch. It is said, well, my grandfather, who was called, he washes their bodies. Did anybody know a man called Washbody? Scandor? I knew him. His name was, the given name was, I don't know if you say Darius or Darius or what, Darius, but they called him Joseph, Old Joe. We called him Old Joe, but the old Oneidas called him Washbody. That's what he did. He lived over in a house it was St. Mary's Church at the time. And St. Mary's Church is now Immaculate Conception, just past the one stop on Double E. That church where it says the morgue there on the old school. And then there's a church right there. And that's a church is called Immaculate Conception. Well, it used to be a wooden church there that was called St. Mary's, and there was a convent next to it that the Cornelius family was raised in because they moved it from there down to Fish Creek Road. And Joe Washbody and his wife lived in the house next to the church. And he was like a caretaker there, but he would prepare bodies for funerals. so they call him Wash Body. He washes bodies. And he came to our house all the time. I have a picture of him with his Model A. And so that's where I was wondering if any of you knew who he was. He was a brother to John Skindor, who is Janet and Janice's grandfather. If you know Janice Hurth and Janet Malcolm. And their grandfather is John Skindor, and this Joe Washbody was John Skindor's brother. And he lived over there right across from the school. And I think, who lives there now? I'll think of her name. Okay. This one lived, he still lived at Oneida Castle, and he killed a witch. This was the grandfather of the woman that was talking. She had come to his home, and while she was there, they had gotten into a fight. Quote, "You're so proud. First thing you know, your daughter will be buried, and all you will see is a big mound of dirt." Unquote. He said, they say, "You're the one that's going to be the first one buried, and there will be only a big mound of dirt left." Then he chased her outside and around some barrels that were standing there. He finally caught her, and he cut her throat. Oh. They didn't punish him because she had threatened him a few times before, but they never will punish the person who kills a witch. It's very interesting concept, right? So you could go around killing witches all the time.
So ladies better watch it.
Yeah.
A witch.
And this one is Sagoyaha Okaliowilos. And his child and a witch. If you want to talk about any of this, let me know. Some woman used to visit this man by name of Saguya Dohal. Saguya Dohal. That's the wash body word. And they always argued every time she came to visit him. It must have been about something important, but they just couldn't seem to come to any kind of an agreement. Now I think this is a version from a different person about the same story.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. The women finally became very angry with Saguya Dohal. It was later discovered that this woman was a witch, and the man knew about the ways and habits of witches, and this woman just kept coming to his house. Then he realized that she was working on a plan to cast an evil spell on him. Then one day she came again when he was inside the house with his daughter, who was about 8 years old. The woman started to talk, and she said every bad thing she could think of to say to him. He didn't say anything, he just sat there quietly, thinking. Then his daughter came by him, and he picked up her up and held her in his arms. And the woman thought of a more mean and insulting things to say to him. Then finally she said, quote, "Well, you do love your daughter, too bad, because in just a little while she will be just a lump on the ground." Unquote. That's when he took a knife out of his pocket. The witch ran away, but he chased her. When he caught up to her, he stabbed her on her neck. Then he said, quote, "Well, she won't die." So he slashed her throat to make sure the witch would die. Then a crowd of people came to see what he had done and to decide what should be done to this man who committed the crime. Even the chiefs came to see him, and he told them if they wait until after 10 days, then he would defend himself if anyone tried to touch him. So they didn't do anything to him. They found out that it was their way or law that any person who killed a witch was not guilty of murder. So there could have been, they said there was a whole bunch of witches here. Why? You know, I don't know why that was. Maybe I'll change it to a different story. False face medicine man. I could read that one. The medicine men were called false faces, and when they made medicine for anyone, the ones that put colds on the sick person were the only ones that wore the false faces. Do you know about the ceremonies for false faces? They usually have a fire, and they have hot coals in the fire, and those coals are picked up with the medicine men pick them up with their hands, and they put them on the head of the person who is afflicted with any kind of disease. And nobody gets burned. There are people who are living now who have seen this and who attest to it. That say yes, that's how the cure occurs. The rest of them just painted their faces with dye that they had made. They boiled the bloodroot and used that for painting their faces. Are you familiar with bloodroot? Bloodroot is a plant, a flower plant. It grows on a slender stem, and it's like a little white daisy, about as big as maybe a nickel, the head of it. But if you take and break it off, it's called bloodroot because it's red, it's bright red that comes from the stem. I used to go and pick the flowers and make bouquets out of them in the springtime. They're in the spring, they come out. Then they made medicine for anyone. Then they made a gruel of corn, mush. They made mush. The medicine man would then plead. Then the dancers would put coals on the one wearing the false face. Then the dancers try to move like the sick person. If they have a tick in their shoulder, that's the way the dancers try to move. A tick is when you move uncontrollably. The medicine man will be moving in the same way, and as they dance, they will touch the sick person. I think these stories, that's only a paragraph long. I think there's a whole lot to the story that is not told there, so it's like it's part of the story. There's stuff that goes in between this. Not everything is said. And I thought about that with most of these stories. To me, they were like the highlights, but they were incomplete. Didn't tell the whole thing. A description of the person who is sick, or false faces. They talk about false face. If you don't know what a false face is, you wouldn't know it. So they don't describe a false face, what it looks like. They drew some pictures of it here, but it doesn't say it in the story, what a false face looks like, or what kinds of false faces, because there are false faces that are made out of corn husk, and then there are the false faces that are carved out of trees, and the tree it's carved out of the tree, when the tree, it's a living tree, and they carved the whole face out, that. Here's a story about St. Vitus dance. I think I'll read that one, then I'll go to the back. This one is, the way they made medicine, first he would break up the plug of tobacco, then pass it out. Now, tribal folks didn't have plugs of tobacco, I don't think in the 1800s, for instance. A plug of tobacco, that's just tobacco that's cured and pressed into like a square. I knew people here that would chew tobacco, and they'd say they buy a plug of tobacco, and then they take their jackknife and cut a slice off to chew. And that they're talking about a plug of tobacco, and that's what I know about that. Now then, he would ask the Creator to cure the one that is sick of this illness called St. Vitus dance. The plug of tobacco that was left, he would pass out. That's what was left from the one got the first piece of tobacco, and then the rest of it would be passed to the others. And parched corn he would throw in the fire. So corn, the last one had corn mush, and this one has corn also. That's very important. White corn is part of the ceremony. Then he would take live coals out of the fire. Then they would come in and dance. They would circle where she was lying, the one with St. Vitus dance. So this one says, this is a woman that has this affliction. And see, it says he take coals out of the fire. It doesn't say if he picked them up with his hand or if he took some kind of, what do we call that, a coal hunt or coal shovel for ashes or something. It didn't say use that. As a matter of fact, what they did was use their bare hand, but it doesn't say that here. So it just says that he would take ashes out of the stove and take turns putting it on her head. They'd put the hot coals on her head. The dancers received small pieces of tobacco then, and they went out. When they came back in, they would fight over cooked, mashed up corn until it was all gone. I don't know what that fighting is about. I don't have any notion. Then the one who is sick will throw nuts and candy on the floor 3 different times. They will also fight over this. The 3rd time, they will take corn soup and go home. So the corn, the white corn is all part of the ceremony at different parts. Some of it is the fire, and then eat the mush, and they also eat the corn soup at this ceremony. And I don't know where they get nuts and candy. You see, it seems to me like I can picture like walnuts and pecans or hickory nuts. The only thing I can think of that would be native or natural would be like hickory nuts and butternuts. That would be growing in the community, in the forest. But they wouldn't have things like Brazil nuts and peanuts, any pecans. They wouldn't have any, cashew. No, they wouldn't have any of that. So this is like transporting the story like 200 or 300 years from that time to the present time.
And it loses something.
Hmm?
It loses something.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
its
it's not like the pure story, original.
Because those were lost.
That's right. It loses something in the translation here.
Mm-hmm.
But these are the stories that the Oneida people remembered in 1942, 1940, 41. These are the stories they remembered.
Okay.
And it probably got lost in translation before they got it.
Mm-hmm.
So now let me see what else we can. Here's one on Bewitched again. And it's translated by Amos Christian. Now he's saying that the meaning of bewitched is an illness among our people. There are different types of this illness according to the clans in their families. Suppose it was the Wolf clan and someone would be stricken with the illness, or if it was the illness of the Bear clan, whichever illness they are stricken with. They could only be cured by the members of their own clan. All members of such a clan would be called, and they would have a feast and dance at the home of the stricken one. One day my father went to see this man, Atya Dohada, the man's name, who was ill. And he told this man, who was all curled up tight lying there, my father said to him, "You are stricken with the thunderer's illness." That was a new one to me. I never heard of the thunderer's illness. So the Thunderer's clan was called. They had to wear masks and dance their kind of dance. It is said they would curl themselves up like hoops and twist as they danced. That was the dance of the Thunderers. While they were dancing, this man, Atya Dohada, who was ill, got up and danced with them, and he was cured. So he really was stricken with the Thunderer's illness. That is the reason they were able to cure him. So I never heard of the Thunderer's illness or the Thunderer's dance before I read this item. I don't know about that. Unmasked Medicine Man. If you want, you could, get a copy of this stuff, but I have tabbed where the English version is, but there's 2 pages there that are Oneida, and the English translation is right beneath the Oneida Words.
Mm-hmm.
So you might want to get, not the whole book, but you might want to get 5 stories or something like that and look at it and practice it or something. Okay, we'll do another one here. One time there lived a couple. They had one child, a son. When he grew up, he started going out nights. He was out every night. Soon he was staying out until dawn. His mother kept telling him to stop going out so much because he couldn't get up in the morning, and he couldn't work either because he was always sleepy. So his mother said, "One of these days something bad is going to happen to you because you are always on the road at night." So it happened. One night he was getting ready to go out. He was all ready when suddenly he saw a woman standing out by the gate. It seemed to him that she had her head covered with a shawl so he couldn't see who she was. So he walked over there and got a hold of her shawl and looked under it to see if he could recognize her, and he was astonished to see fiery eyes under the shawl. He let go of the shawl quickly. He walked backwards. He was so scared, and the woman followed right behind until they got to his door. When he opened the door, she pushed him and he fell inside. It was said that the parents picked him up and that it was several days before he was well again. But it is said that he never went out at night again. So they call this young man bewitched. This is told by Stadler King. Stadler King wrote hundreds of stories. We got his file is about all his stories, about half of a filing cabinet drawer full. And Stadler King, he wrote on every subject you can think, and there are several stories in here by Stadler, and that is Josh's great grandfather. And he had other children, but he died fairly young. I think he was about 56 when he passed away. And he was one of the major writers of this project. I'm going to read one or two more. What time we got here? Oh, it's only 3:30, so we got time to talk about witches and ghosts and before Halloween. And this has nothing to do with Halloween, does it?
Wait, no, that's-
It would be any time of the year, whenever things happen, they happen. And they happen in the winter, in the spring, in the summer, in the fall. With the Oneidas, they had these stories. She saw a ghost. This is by Jane Cornelius to Ida Blackhawk. One time when we were living in Green Bay, that's here, close by, Margaret stayed home alone. Now, I don't know who Margaret is, to watch the house. Along toward morning, she woke up and felt something hard lying by her side. She couldn't even scream, she was so scared. She thought she would get up. Then she felt something on her arm, as if it was somebody holding her. But she did manage to get up and get to the door. Then she grabbed the door and pulled as hard as she could. Slowly, she was getting loose until just her fingers were being held. Still, she could not see what the thing looked like that was holding her, until she managed to open the door and get outside before she got loose. Then she thought, now she can get a good look at whatever was holding her. To her surprise, there was nothing or nobody there. It's an interesting end to that story.
Are these stories in any book, or just that what you have there?
No,
Or
there is a
is
print.
it research?
There is a print of the stories, I think, without the two Oneida versions,
Oh.
just the English.
Mhm.
And I couldn't locate that, so I used the complete story here.
Mhm.
But they're not printed anywhere else, and they could be.
Yeah, the library has a copy of this book.
What is the book called?
Witch's Story.
Oh,
Yeah. This is the
which,
cover.
which, which story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Witch's Story.
Stories.
That's the one that
Okay.
it's just a white book, but it doesn't have. I don't think it has all the Oneida versions in it.
Yeah.
It just has the English.
It's the same version as that one.
Is the same.
Yeah.
the
Except it's
same-
in those weird spiral.
Oh.
It's like printed like maybe in the 80s.
Oh, because I thought the one I had was about as thick as this, and it had just staples in the spine.
Oh yeah, they have one that's in one of those.
A
Same
spiral.
as it, yeah. spiral.
Oh, okay, like this, or like this
Grieving binder?
in a binder,
No, it's kind of like the sign-in
like
sheet.
this here,
Yeah.
with the spiral thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. He saw a ghost. It was said that Abram Smith, oh, here's one with a name, was tricked. Or maybe he saw a ghost one time when he was coming home from the north. He walked on the railroad track. Finally it became dark. He came to a dwelling. He went into the barn and looked for a place to sleep. Sometime during the night, a rainstorm came up. It was thundering. He became frightened. So he got up and left. He walked down the railroad tracks again. He noticed two women walking ahead of him. They were carrying a light to light the way for him, and it was a sunflower on fire they were carrying to light the way for him. Well, that was interesting. The sunflower gave a light to Abram Smith so he could walk on the railroad track. They came into town, Shawano, with him. It was raining yet, so he stayed in Shawano all day. In the evening, then he came on toward home. When it got real dark, the two women with the sunflowers on fire were ahead of him again. Then he noticed the two men walking behind him, not closely. So that's the way they came all the way into Oneida. Translated by Marie Henry. So they walked all the way like that, and there were these two women in front with sunflowers that were lit up, and two men behind him. And Abram Smith walked to Oneida all the way from Shawano. Now that's an interesting, that's an interesting story. And
Well, I would think they're kind of fit for walking anyway, because nobody had cars, horses, or
oh yeah,
Or-
that's true. He was walking from up north. He was probably coming from a lumber camp somewhere where he was working.
working. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Abram Smith. I didn't know who Abram Smith was. Oh, here's one about the feast for the ghosts. So I mentioned that a little bit. This is what they call the feast. They make it for someone who is being haunted by a ghost. They set one extra plate at the table. No one that has been invited will sit there. I think that's the wrong translation. But it's like no one will sit there who has been invited. They may be a person gets hungry at night usually, that she is being haunted by a ghost. So if the person gets hungry at night, if you're hungry at night, you're haunted by a ghost. Okay. So when there has been a feast made, this ghost will be appeased and it will not bother anyone again. So that is the reason it is called Feast for the Ghost. How about that? Winona, is your grandfather Stadler King too?
Is what?
Is your grandfather Stadler King?
Buzzy King.
Well, Buzzy, yeah, I know, but who's Buzzy's dad? Henry?
Yep.
Could have been Henry, yeah.
I think
Oh,
it's
get all
Henry.
these kings right sooner or later.
Some of that seems to be in that last story, practiced today. Plates are set and meals are given to people who have passed, like at the yearly.
10-day
A
feast.
death
10-day
feast.
yeah.
The death feast, yeah.
The 10-day feast. And sometimes they do have a feast, extra feast for a remembrance or a memorial or a certain thing that happened with this deceased person. Then they'll have a plate for that person.
Well, there is the death feast also held every year.
Yeah.
Oh,
that,
yeah, that's, no, I know the Oneida name, I can't think of it, but I know it. Ogiwa? Ogiwe? Is that the dead
I
feast?
think so.
It's like
It's
that for dead
yeah.
feast too.
Yeah. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have then y'all bring something to pass. And that's the only feast or ceremony where they go clockwise. They'll
Clockwise,
dance
otherwise they go
clockwise,
counterclockwise.
always
Yeah,
counterclockwise
yeah.
in the longhouse, yeah. Yeah, it's the only ceremony where they go clockwise. And then there's a plate put out and That's the first portion you give of your, whatever you bring,
Mhm.
and put it on that plate.
It's a favorite of the person who's deceased, if you have people who are deceased that you remember.
Right, that you're,
That-
you're
that-
remembering, yeah,
Mhm.
a favorite, yeah.
What happens to the feast at the end? I mean,
To the plate, it's put out. It's put out in the
Usually
woods.
before sunrise,
Mm-hmm, yeah, it's put out.
usually before sunrise.
Mm-hmm.
do they have any modern day witches in Oneida now?
I could name a few.
Not personal.
Yeah. I don't really think so, but it seems like it's still possible. It's still possible if there's someone who is continuously doing unwanted or bad things.
Mothers, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and it's, not with the program, I would say, that they're opposite, they're doing things opposite, that's harmful to the community, I would say. But I wouldn't hesitate to say anybody, but I think it could be possible. Mhm.
They used to talk about good medicine, bad medicine. They talk about bad medicine here. Are they potions to make, that the witches use on people? And what are they? No, I'm kidding.
You want the recipe?
No, have you heard of that?
We were just talking something about medicines at the elder meal site today, and one of the guys said, "Oh, it's Ojibwe," and the word in Ojibwe, I don't know the Oneida word, but the Ojibwe word is jibik for medicine, and it could be bad or good medicine, either way. And good medicine would help cure people or those kinds of things, and bad medicine would be like a curse on people, if somebody be stricken with a disease or stricken with something. And I will tell you that I lived up in Lac du Flambeau part-time when I was working up there for 3 years, and people still practice those kinds of things. They do. They do practice them. And I don't know what the advantage is to them or anything, because usually if you do something like that, that would be, you do it because it's going to have an effect on you, something good for you. But I don't know, I saw things happen up at Lac du Flambeau myself, and I talked to Bertha Big John. I stayed with her part-time, and Bertha Big John, she was quite a person, quite older woman, and I tell you what she did, or where she lived. She lived in a little house that was left over from the lumbering days, and it was like one of the houses that maybe a family lived in who worked in the lumber mill. And it's one of those, like a what do they call those, company houses. I mean, she probably a company house. And I used to stay with her when I stayed up there in Flambeau, because I had to drive back and forth to work. All my kids were here. And it was 3 hours to drive to Flambeau. And a funny thing she did was she always wanted to make my meal for me at lunchtime. I'd come home at lunchtime, and she'd have fresh fish and all that, you know, if she didn't fall asleep. But she'd put her meal on the stove and fall asleep, and the pan would be burnt black, smoke would be billowing out there. And I'd come home, you know, come in, and there she was, sleeping there. And she'd open up the door and fire that pan out in the snowbank. in the springtime, there was about 10 pans. out there. Mud, that was on Mud Lake. And she also told me a lot of ghost stories, a lot of things like that. She told me about the medicine, the Chippewa, Ojibwe, Jibic medicine. And she was a rum runner during the Prohibition. She had an old car, I don't know what kind it was. She told me she drove on Highway 70 from Lac du Flambeau over to Le Coudray and delivered booze when she was younger, much younger. And she told me about that stuff. But she also told me about the things that happened to people, like if a child was born with a crippled arm or something like that. She would tell me stories about that kind of thing, and that it was because they always had a reason. They always knew that, you know, oh, we know this was going to happen because so and so had witched them, or they had bad words together. Sometime never got over it, that kind of thing. She'd tell me about that too. That it would be years ago, 20 years ago or something, and they didn't get over it. You know, they never got over it. And oh yeah, well that's why she's like that, or that's why she got sick. Is because they had that big fight like 20 years ago, and she would tell me all the little stories that were going on on that reservation.
Mhm.
And I told them, this is what I told them. I said, you know, the business committee, their governing body, I said, you got the most beautiful reservation in the world. Beautiful. They got, I think, 126 lakes on the reservation, something like that. Beautiful. In the worst social problems I ever saw. There were kids out in the woods. They had a curfew, but the kids busted all the lights, you know, so nobody could find them. And then they'd be sitting out in the woods with a case of beer somewhere, and after curfew, nobody knew where they were. And that happened. All those kinds of things happened up there. I saw them. Because I stayed with her, or I stayed with Joe Value's mother, Agnes Value. She's Oneida. And she and Lucy Cornelius lived up there. She married Bill Cornelius, and she lived in Lake Pagakama. And then the Smiths from Milwaukee, Althea Smith's wife was Delia.
Mhm.
Delia Smith. Delia lived up there too on Fence Lake.
Okay.
Them three ladies spoke Oneida, and they'd get on the telephone and they'd be talking Oneida like crazy, all three of them. Then, you know, they never forgot their language, and they'd get on the phone and they'd talk Oneida to one another. So, and then I learned a lot of stories because they were older women. They were all older than I was. 40, then 30 something or 40, and they were like 28, 30 years older than me.
Mhm.
And so they knew stuff like this, and they would tell me all the kind of things that were going on up at Lac du Flambeau, which were, some of them were very, very strange. Oh, one thing she did say, you know, when it gets dusk in the springtime or something, the sun is just going down, she must have had 1,000 bats fly out of the attic part of the house. There'd be a long line of bats flying out because there would be insects over the water, and bats eat insects, and there'd be this long, and during the daytime, they were all up in the attic sleeping.
Hanging.
Yeah, and
Hanging around,
yeah. And she'd take her broom handle and she'd hit the ceiling and she'd say, "These are the bats now." She'd say, "Stop moving furniture up there." That's what she'd say. And there was a little hole, you could it was only about a quarter big. And one night we were, she was sleeping she was in her bed and I was in mine. And we were just visiting, talking back and forth, before we went to bed. And here a dang old bat come out of that little hole. And she got her broom, and she was swinging that broom around. And I said, you cannot catch a bat with that broom. And she kept swinging it around till she only had a few straws left in the bottom of her broom. And you can't hit a bat with a broom or nothing else. So, and finally the bat went behind a dress that she had hanging on a nail there with her hanger, and the bat went behind there. I think it went back in that hole it came out of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that was a story about bats, and there must have been, I don't know, there were hundreds. I don't know if there were 1,000, but you could see a long trail of them. If you went outside when they were leaving, you could see a long ribbon of bats flying around in the sky over the water. That was interesting.
What a thing to see, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was quite an experience, Yeah. Okay, here are twins with special powers. This is Saya Gonadudi-ga, Indian name. Ga means they're gone. That's a person that's no longer with us. That's what I said, that Gus Gus Go, that was a big one. But if you said Gus Go Ga, mean that was a great big pig that died. That's the This lady had grandchildren that were twins. It was said that one time they were amusing themselves. There was a mortar standing there and they were putting something in it. Now their grandmother was going to use it. She was amazed to find streaked snakes in the bowl she was about to pound the corn in. So she said to the twins, "Go at once and get those snakes out of there. I'm going to use that to pound my corn in." So they went, and all they took out of it was some chips. So it was said that the reason they could do things like that was because they were never baptized. And there must be 10 stories like that, where they have special powers like this because they are not baptized.